Call to order. Good morning. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before we proceed, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items for our remote hearing. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is a committee and subcommittee policy that members will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the subcommittee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything you say. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this hearing, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteranaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded in the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of a subcommittee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? Hearing none, we shall proceed. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. I'm happy to be hosting this joint hearing with Chairman Pappas and the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations today to discuss IT modernization programs at the VA. I would like to welcome the newly confirmed Chief Information Officer, Assistant Secretary Kurt Delbenay. During our hearing today, we will review VA's progress with managing and coordinating their major IT modernization program. VA has historically been challenged to successfully manage IT programs. In 2015, VA's management of IT acquisitions and operations were added to the GAO's high-risk series and remain there. The committee has received encouraging updates on the effort to modernize VA's financial management system. However, the new financial management system cannot exist in a vacuum. The success of modernization is contingent on a successful update to the electronic health record and supply programs. It is up to the CIO to make sure that the technology behind these systems communicate with each other and are secure. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Delbenay to provide some insight on the challenges ahead of him and his plans to get VA on a successful path forward. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to his testimony. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Matt Rosendale to deliver any opening remarks he may have. Mr. Rosendale.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. And welcome to Mr. Delbenay. I want to thank you for re-entering public service as VA's Assistant Secretary for Information Technology and the Chief Information Officer. I also want to thank Dr. Evans for stepping into the position last year and staying on board to advise you. I will keep my opening remarks very brief. In our previous hearing, I expressed how important it is that the Office of Information and Technology not stand still. The average tenure of a VA Chief Information Officer is 17 months. Mr. Delbenay, I hope you will be with us for a much longer time than that. In the past, we've seen far too much treading water as leadership turns over. I look forward to hearing your priorities this morning and then watching you get to work. I want to hear about the key initiatives that you intend to accomplish in a 6-month period, a 9-month period, a 12-month period, so we can get a good window of these goals. I want to know how you translate OIT's published strategic goals into a practical agenda. When I look at OIT, I see an organization with sensible priorities, but intractable bureaucratic barriers. I see pockets of great talent, but widespread struggles to recruit and retain employees. I see a budget process that consistently fails to reflect your needs. I see boom and bust cycles of lavish spending followed by painful cuts. Above all else, I see an organization that's always struggling to catch up. The VA is continually growing and creating new IT requirements faster than your predecessors could even manage them. For every success by OIT in delivering what the Veterans Health Administration or Veterans Benefits Administration needs, there's two examples of discord or disappointment. In response, OIT always seems to be in the midst of an internal reorganization. I hope you will bring an outside perspective and break out of these tired old patterns. VA is attempting the biggest technology modernization drive in its history, and OIT needs strong leadership now more than ever. Never forget that when we discuss your network, software, and technical debt, what we're really talking about is the quality and accessibility of veterans' care and their benefits. The veterans notice your performance, and so does this committee. I thank you so much for joining us today, and Mr. Chair, I would yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to recognize my colleague, Chairman Pappas, to deliver any opening remarks he may have. Chairman Pappas.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mervan. And I think that today's hearing clearly has an important focus, the information systems at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we'll soon hear from our witness, Assistant Secretary Kurt Del Bene, that the VA spends billions of dollars on the software, hardware, training, staffing, and outside contracts to support these critical IT systems. Now, the systems for VA are so important. They support the hospital system. They process and provide veterans benefits. They keep track of medical supplies and just to pay the department's bills each and every day. During our oversight hearings, when we look at the department's many challenges, we typically hear that the root cause is IT. And equally important, the solution usually means fixing or modernizing these IT systems, often due to antiquated technology that is years or decades out of date. And then we always hear that the IT projects are behind schedule, sometimes many years behind schedule, and the major headaches and financial losses continue, which can directly affect veterans. In November, our two subcommittees heard from department witnesses about how antiquated IT systems result in major supply issues for VA hospitals. Each year, VA buys billions of dollars of vital life-saving medical supplies, from surgical masks to respirators and from syringes to cotton swabs. The department has the nation's largest integrated healthcare system and must have in place a modern and effective supply chain. But we've continually heard about the weaknesses and failures of VA's purchasing and inventory management systems for medical supplies. Most notably, the Government Accountability Office added VA to its high-risk list in 2019 for acquisition, largely due to medical supply chain issues. In the latter part of 2020, VA announced it would replace its medical surgical prime vendor program, but we know that unfortunately, the department is years away from this goal. VA is trying to adapt a Department of Defense acquisition system to its needs, but the results thus far have not been promising. An Inspector General report released in November identified major shortcomings with a pilot project to try out the DoD system at the Lovell VA Hospital in North Chicago. And as the Office of Inspector General testified, DoD's Defense Medical Logistics Standard Support, or DMLS system, did not meet more than 40% of the high priority business requirements identified by Lovell staff as essential to successful operations. So the translation of that is it simply didn't work. Additionally, in August, the U.S. Court of Federal Claims issued a ruling that VA's attempt at using the Department of Defense system conflicted with current law regarding procurement, including those meant to protect small veteran-owned businesses, and this halted the initiative. I should point out that despite the court decision last summer, VA is attempting to restart that effort with the hope that it will pass favorably within the courts. This restart of the previously failed attempt will occur before VA has produced a comprehensive strategy to modernize its supply chain, and it's not clear if VA's latest attempt will pass muster. Frustratingly, during our November hearing, we noted that VA has made 4 attempts at supply chain modernization since 2004. You heard that right, 4. None of them succeeded, and it will now attempt its 5th. Even with smaller IT modernization efforts, we've seen failures. So the Oversight Investigation Subcommittee held a hearing in July 2020 that examined another issue, which is sexual harassment among VA employees, which is a well-documented problem. GAO made 7 recommendations of how to improve how VA responds to these incidents to prevent harassment. And to the credit of VA leadership, VA has made progress in closing most of those recommendations. But despite promises made, a glaring exception has been the need for an effective IT system to track and report incidents of sexual harassment across the department. That system was promised by the end of 2021, and it's still not operational. One reason IT modernization misses the mark is the nature of VA, which is large and often operates in stovepipe fashion, with one part of the department not working close enough with another. Too often we have one system for veteran benefits and another system for the hospital. VA does not have a robust review process in place for major acquisition projects that takes into account all of the complexities of these major, expensive, multi-year projects. So I look forward to today's hearing. I look forward to asking the Assistant Secretary how the department can ensure that IT infrastructure programs, big and small, receive appropriate scrutiny and are properly reviewed and then are well executed. He's recently started in his position as CIO, and I'm sure he has many insights to share with us. So Chairman Mervan, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. At this time, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Mann to deliver any opening remarks he may have. My good friend, Mr. Mann.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for doing this morning. As the last in the train of opening remarks and knowing we have votes called here, much of what I want to address today has already been mentioned. Therefore, I'll keep my remarks brief so we can hear from our witness a little bit. Congratulations on your confirmation as VA Assistant Secretary of Information and Chief Information Officer. In the past decade, as was mentioned, the Office of Information Technology, OIT, has had 3 permanent and 6 acting CIOs. I won't call it a revolving door, but many people have walked in and have walked out over the last few years. Despite good intentions, short tenures have undermined OIT's long-term initiatives and left the office without consistent leadership, while the rest of VA, in my mind, grew out of control. Mr. Delbene, you are now in charge, and I'm optimistic that you will bring unique skills and perspectives from the private sector. Today, in addition to the points raised by my colleagues, I would like to hear your assessment of VA's bureaucratic processes. To me, there's a web of red tape, even compared to other federal agencies. In addition to law and regulation regarding IT, your office has extensive internal procedures dictating interactions with the Veterans Benefits Administration, Veterans Health Administration, and National Cemetery Administration. They are your clients, but you are also their policemen. You have to please them and also make them follow the rules. When OIT and other organizations don't work well together, IT projects fail, technology is uncoordinated, and resources get wasted. I know it is not an easy task. In the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, we too often hear about struggling IT projects impacting VA operations, only to realize OIT is not driving them or even involved. The root causes are bureaucracy and many times misaligned priorities. No private sector company, certainly not a giant like Microsoft, can achieve peak performance without all of its divisions working in harmony. I expect when you take a comprehensive look under the hood of VA IT, you will find a lot of activities and processes that provide little to no value for veterans and VA. I'm eager to hear how you benchmark OIT against a large private sector technology company with roughly 18,000 employees and contractors. I think it's a fair comparison. VA grows dramatically larger every year, and that generates more and more IT requirements for you to manage. The budget will always be limited, and VA will continue to expand. I hope you can overcome the bureaucratic hurdles quickly, as OIT does not fall farther behind. You may have heard the old saying about eating the frog. I think it applies to what lies ahead of you. If your job is to eat a frog, it's best to do it in the morning before it grows any larger. I look forward to your discussion today. Thank you to my friend, Congressman Mervan, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I will introduce the witness we have before the subcommittee. Mr. Kurt Delbene is the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer for the Department of Veteran Affairs. We will now hear a prepared, Mr. Delbene, if you'd like to go forward, please.
Mervan and Pappas, ranking members of Rosendale and Mann, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on my initial thoughts about the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Information and Technology and our efforts to modernize and secure VA's IT systems. Although I've only been a month in the role, I continue to be excited about the opportunities to improve our delivery of services to veterans, their families, and caregivers through driving excellence in our IT development and execution, and leveraging my previous experience in leading large and complex teams at Microsoft, and to create excellence in VA IT. We're entering an era, as been talked about previously, in IT that is increasingly vital to providing high-quality care and benefits that veterans expect and deserve. The importance of IT systems has never been higher, and we must ensure that our efforts are focused and resourced accordingly. I'd first like to thank Congress for the resources already provided to OIT. While we appreciate funding received, we need to set clear priorities for the budget, given the constrained fiscal environment that all agencies find themselves in. Moreover, as new veterans legislation is enacted, such additional benefits like toxic exposure, we need to make sure that the necessary IT resources are provided so that these new programs can be well executed without negatively impacting existing initiatives. Stepping back, I believe that VA's modernization projects, for them to be successful, they must start with a clear vision, articulated or adequate resources, a development plan, success metrics, and strong collaborative partnerships with all stakeholders, and that includes members of Congress. For such a stakeholder-centered vision, project plans can be then developed using agile methodology and maintaining an up-to-date list of project priorities. OIT has established the foundation for this operational approach, but we're still early in the journey. A good deal of my focus over the past month has been understanding where we are in that journey and to help the team hone our approach to achieve a level of clarity and sophistication that's common in the commercial engineering field. During the past month, I found the team to be dedicated to the sacred mission and trusted to us and really eager to excel. In my time so far, a few themes have emerged, which I highlight in my written statements. First, engineering excellence is a critical discipline of continuous improvement in how we execute our mission. It's the process of stepping back and looking at how we work and developing priorities and action plans to improve that execution. For this, we need to consider a number of questions that have come up recently. How do we best do software and services development in an environment that's heavily outsourced to contractors? How can we continuously prioritize our work to assure that we are delivering on the most important capabilities for our stakeholders? How we resource our work, especially addressing the extensive backlog of systems modernization needs the department. It's been talked about by other members. How do we create and operate a highly reliable infrastructure? And how do we develop, organize, and reward our highly capable tech workforce to deliver on the department's mission and vision? As I alluded to earlier, resource allocation is a complex topic in our environment with competing demands and often limited funding sources. It's critical that we create and maintain clarity with each OIT work portfolio of the project priorities and funding levels. I believe we have an opportunity to drive greater clarity in resource allocation in this area. Cybersecurity is paramount to the success of VA's mission. We need to complement the administration and legislative directives with clearly articulated vision, a roadmap, and metrics that represent VA's cybersecurity strategy and their current posture. The directives presented to us are critical input to that strategy and a key priority for us, but it's critical that we contextualize it to the VA and that everyone in the team internalize the strategy and use it in their decision-making. To deliver end user expectations of OIT, we must establish user satisfaction and other experience-centric metrics at the foundation of everything we do, from scorecards to feeding our continuous improvement efforts. OIT is supporting three critical interconnected modernization efforts as well: the electronic health records modernization, financial management business transformation, and supply chain modernization. OIT is working with the VA partners to implement these three vital initiatives. I've established a close working relationship with the Chief Acquisition Officer and the new leadership of the EHRM Integration Office, and we'll work together to ensure success of these programs. We'll also continue to support successful IFAM's rollout across the VA. So in closing, despite only being a few weeks on the job, I'm more excited than ever about the path ahead and helping the VA to improve our customer experience and outcomes for veterans, their caregivers, and their families, and to work with the talented VA staff who come to work every day to serve them. Chairman Mirvan and Pappas and ranking members Rosendale and Mann, and the members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support of the VA and our mission, as well as to the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Delbenet. And at this time, subject to the call of the chair, the subcommittee is recessed. I now bring us back into session. I will now recognize myself. Thank you, Mr. Delbene, for waiting as we went to go vote. And I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. VA is currently attempting to execute at least 4 major IT modernization programs at the same time. As I'm sure you've seen, VA has experienced numerous challenges with the rollout of each program. A topic that has not been sufficiently addressed is the management and coordination across programs like EHRM, FMBT, and the supply chain modernization. VA needs your experience and your expertise to cut through the current programmatic silos and standardized measures for success. I realize that you've only been in this position for a few weeks, but what are your short-term goals to get a handle on the management and coordination of these programs? You can unmute yourself, sir.
Maybe it's in the studio.
We're good now.
Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for the question. It's a good one. I think the first thing you have to realize is there are certain responsibilities that our organization, OIT, has to deliver the infrastructure for each of those. And so getting to excellence there, having measures of success, deployment readiness measures, et cetera, is first and foremost. And then I've engaged with each of the leadership teams on those other projects to make sure that I understand where they're at, that I understand, if there's going to be cross dependencies, are we addressing those? And so really just engaging with each of those programs, I think, is the next thing that I need to do. And then the third thing is there are certain responsibilities via programs like FITARA, where I have an opportunity and an obligation to make sure that I think things are driving in the right direction. And I think I've gotten myself integrated, or I have gotten myself integrated into that approval process, which gives me a place to kind of step back, understand where things are, call on the weekly meetings that I'm having in a lot of these programs, or monthly, and make sure that I think they're on track.
In your previous position in the private industry, have you seen this many major IT programs moving at the same time, at the same speed of light?
I've seen a lot of programs running at the same time. This is a lot of programs to be running at the same time. I will say that it requires a lot of coordination, as you mentioned. And it requires a lot of focus. It requires proper resourcing and kind of critical path management to make sure the right decisions are made at the right time. But it's a lot of change in a narrow period of time.
And then given the natural interdependencies of sharing data between the financial systems, the health record system, and the supply chain system, which in your opinion should take precedence on execution and implementation?
Point of clarification, of the different programs, which ones should take precedent?
Of the natural interdependencies of sharing data between the financial system, health record system, and supply chain system, which should take precedent on the execution and implementation. So which is most important?
Gotcha.
Which will be the priority of what you'll be looking at?
I think at foremost, you have to step back and say our primary goal is to serve veterans. And so I think those veterans facing sites such as healthcare are critical to make sure that they're working well. I don't think it often gets to be an either or, but if you set it up as we have to make a decision one versus the other. I think the patient and the veteran comes first.
Following up on those programs, I just have a question on the infrastructure of IT. Is that an assessment? What I mean by that is making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to hold up or implement these programs, and the technology investment that we're making and the assessment of such. If you can elaborate on that and how you'll go about assessing the current IT that we have as a structure.
Thanks. That's a great question. The first thing is, and I would be remiss not thanking Congress for providing infrastructure funds recently to get us up to speed on things like networking on PCs and that core infrastructure. And there's a whole modernization program there. I think it's also important to, and we've been looking deeply at what's the reliability of the core infrastructure like networks, like telephony services, making sure that one, the time to respond if there's an outage is kept at an absolute minimum, that in critical places we have hot standbys or redundancy and that we know how to switch over. So a big part of this is getting deeply ingrained in what is that core infrastructure and making sure that it's run in a highly reliable fashion. And I think the team would say I've been very immersed in that question in just a short period of time.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I yield back, and Chairman Rosendale, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Del Bene, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're trying to make sure that we best utilize the resources, obviously, that are sent through the VA. In your testimony, you noted that resource prioritization is complex and important, and I do agree with that. But I think it goes without saying. Can you expound on where OIT can prioritize its resources better?
And thanks for the question. It's a good one, and it's a thing that I've spent a bunch of time thinking about and talking with the team. The first thing is getting clarity within the work gets broken into portfolios and then underneath particular product lines, if you will. I think we need to get clear understanding of what is funded and what isn't, and understanding what the resource allocations are in each of those areas. That's job one. And then we can identify for those areas, do we need more resources, or is there a reallocation of resources that can be done in one of the portfolios? I think you have to step back and say, are there some places that are overly funded? I don't think there are that many of those in a scarcity situation that we have, but is there an opportunity to balance across the portfolios? But the third thing is it's all dependent upon having great engineering or business accounting that goes with that aids the decision making. And I think getting a greater degree of clarity of where the dollars are allocated to particular programs is, I think, what I was alluding to, of that decision support can be improved.
And I'm glad that you brought up the engineering, because you emphasized the goal of engineering excellence, quote, environment of heavy outsourcing to external contractors. Part of engineering excellence is having at least a few internal teams of top flight software developers. How are you going to do that, and which areas do you think are most important?
And so I do think, first and foremost, just given the numbers, I think getting our technical staff deeply integrated at a higher degree than historically with the contract organizations, so they act more as one and we have deep knowledge of how they're doing and where there are opportunities to improve. I think that's job one. I agree with your point that we also need the opportunity to have software development internally. We have that within our CTO office, and work is going on there. We have it in our DevSecOps organization. One place that's a huge opportunity is low code, no code solutions, where we can rapidly build a solution and deliver it to one of the stakeholders, whether it's VHA or VBA. And then building platforms for continued innovation, like in the VBA space around claims automation, I think is another place that we really have an opportunity to build a capability over a period of time.
So sticking with the contractors, and there are an extraordinary number of IT contractors operating in and around Virginia. All contractors, as you well, not equal. I see the same names, however, winning work year after year, regardless of their records of success or the value that they provide. I also see a bias towards big entrenched players. What are your expectations of those contractors?
Well, great question. I think we do need to hold them to a standard, and that standard is in terms of delivery, and it's in terms of efficacy and efficiency in that delivery as well. So I've been talking with the team about, tell me at the next click down, tell me what resources we're paying for with a particular contract. And is there a way to drive greater efficiency there? That's point one. And point two is there are places we're actually using smaller contractors that are innovate in a particular area. I think there's more opportunity to do that, both to drive diversity in the contractors we use, but across the board, I think it comes down to holding to a higher standard. And I think part of that is the thing that I mentioned earlier, getting deeply immersed in the work so we understand it well enough to see where those opportunities exist.
Very good. And I think that's why we're going to rely upon you to develop matrix so that we can see, so that we can actually measure and define what is success, because without that, we just don't know where we are, which leads me to my last question. Even the competitive contracts seem to favor the big entrenched players. But how often is sole source contracting used, and how much is too much to go with this sole source contracting?
Well, my sense is that sole source isn't used that much when you're talking about the large use of a contractor within the VA so far. But I think your point is that we should have competition there, that we should make sure we're driving excellence in the contracts that we do use, and that we should be open to having others that have good ideas involved. And I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Good deal. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I would yield back.
Ranking Member Rosendale, I thank you very much. I now recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan, and thank you, Ranking Member Rosendale, for both holding this hearing. I've appreciated the questions thus far from both of you. Welcome, Mr. Del Bene. I'm very happy to have you participate in our hearing today. And the VA, as you know, is a very large agency that spends billions of dollars in IT. And it's extremely important that we have someone with your expertise and experience in this position. As the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House, I make it a point to be involved personally with the Technology Modernization Subcommittee because of the importance of IT modernization to the care and benefits that we provide veterans, and because anytime we enlarge or introduce a program, IT is certainly a part of the implementation. While we spent a lot of time discussing EHRM and supply chain modernization, I wanted to bring your attention to the importance of modernizing and investing in the Veterans Benefit Administration IT systems. For discussion with my staff regarding the IT budget reviews, it's apparent that VBA has lagged in the total amount of spending and attention it has received to modernize its IT. My top priority this Congress is to successfully pass the Honoring Our Pact Act, which will improve healthcare and benefits for veterans exposed to toxic substances during their military service. From my previous experience with passing the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act last Congress, I know that we need to be thinking about thinking now about providing the infrastructure at VA to support their staff with quickly and efficiently processing new claims and getting benefits to veterans. And even before that, we know that Secretary Shinseki enlarged eligibility for such claims for PTSD. And we experienced a huge backlog then. So I hope we learned from those experiences. I would like to start a dialogue with you as soon as possible to determine exactly what the VA needs to support this incredibly important legislation. Your support and leadership to employees will be necessary to create the change needed to make this program successful. So can I count on you to work with our committee and my staff on your budget and staff requirements or staffing requirements to successfully implement the program?
Thank you for the question. You definitely can count on working with me. I believe in a very collaborative relationship and also being very transparent about where things stand. I think your point around programs like the PAC can actually drive a bunch of new claims, which we want to honor and we want to support. And so but we need to do that in an efficient way. And that's where IT systems properly invested can actually help us deliver a good experience for veterans. It is critical. So I welcome the ability to collaborate there.
Well, thank you. In your short time at VA, what have you identified as the biggest hurdles to modernizing successfully this program?
Well, there are a number of challenges. I don't know whether I would call them hurdles so much as places where we need to focus. I think having clarity of vision, clarity of execution plans, metrics that measure outcomes, I think is absolutely critical, and making sure that we have the resources allocated. I think if you look across the portfolio, it's been the resourcing has been pretty focused on the key needs. But as you say, there's an opportunity for us to increase funding so that we can get to the backlog of modernization that needs to happen and deliver the necessary resources to serve veterans. So I think resourcing is a critical thing as well.
Well, I realize it takes time for VA to get new staff on board and trained on claims processing. So I want to explore all avenues of IT solutions that can help with supporting current VA employees. And certainly your experience helping to fix healthcare.gov makes you the perfect person to get started with this at VA. I certainly want to associate the remarks or the questions that the ranking member asked about the ratio of in-house staffing versus contracted staffing. It's along as I share that concern, and how you are able to recruit these the staffing that we need so that we have staff in-house. I like your response. I appreciated the response you gave, which was to make sure we embed and have these our in-house staff work together with the contracted staff so we get deep understanding of what's going on. So I once want to reiterate, I'm excited to see you on board as VA CIO, and I look forward to working with you to improve VA's IT systems, provide better service and access and better experience for our veterans. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Mann for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I mentioned in my opening, there are a number of IT initiatives across VA that are led by offices other than OIT. Often OIT has little to no involvement of those efforts, despite the obvious need for coordination with your office. When you were leading Microsoft's corporate strategy, would you have let major projects storm ahead without the chief information officer's involvement, and any thoughts on the matter?
It's a good question. So Microsoft is a very diverse organization, and while the central systems were run out of my team CSEO, the development and the operating those systems, there were also systems that we depended upon across the organization. And I find the thing that made us successful is to have close collaboration with the leaders that were delivering those systems. And we were constantly looking to see whether there was an optimization that could be made about what the boundaries of the systems are, who was doing what. And so I think above all, you just have to have a strong working relationship and a respect that there's a bunch of smart people that are saying, wait, from my perspective, this is a challenge, and that is heard and responded to.
And what do you intend to do differently to ensure that OIT has a prominent place at the table? It seems like, OIT obviously is not the right office to lead all the big ticket initiatives that involve the whole department, but it needs to be heavily involved. It hasn't been. What's going to change, or what's your ideas or strategy on how to make sure that you're at the table, your group is when appropriate?
The first thing is to just develop a good working relationship with the people that are leading those efforts. So for instance, Dr. Adiram in the electronic health records modernization program. And so making sure I have a good relationship, making sure that I'm up to speed. We're also creating constructs like a CIO council around that program to make sure the technical issues that come from it are actually brought together. We see the status overall, and that we make sure the key issues are dealt with. There's also authorities like FATARA that can be used to kind of have a checkpoint before funding happens, where there's a sign off. And I think that I could use those effectively to make sure that the right things are happening within the programs.
Okay, great. And last question, pretty open-ended, but you spent a little over a month as CIO. What keeps you up at night, and what are your initial impressions after being on the ground for 30 days?
I would say first and foremost, a staff that is highly committed to the mission of serving veterans that I've been incredibly impressed by. It's a staff that has built an organization that effectively deals with a very complex, multi-business organization, and does so effectively in delivering on the needs. It's also one that actually does look at metrics and says, how are we doing in terms of delivery? At the same time, I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of infuse some of the DNA and the learnings that we've had in the commercial space to kind of amp up and go further. So for instance, I think the team has heard a lot of me asking particular outages we might have, and outages are going to happen. But for instance, was there redundancy in this case? Was it caught by telemetry? Lots of questions, things we as natural processes in the commercial space, bringing those to the agency. And actually, the final thing I'd say is very welcome receptivity to those kinds of new ideas.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Sheila Sherfilis McCormick. You have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions. As we're looking at the technological systems in place, do we have any real-time reporting for the healthcare providers and case managers going on?
You mean within the electronic health record system, is that what you're asking for? I believe they do. I might take it for the record to get back to you on the specifics about what those particular programs are. But my sense is overall, there's a good number of metrics around what key performance looks like. For instance, how long, what's the responsiveness to getting appointments, et cetera. But if you want, we can kind of give you a better summary of that as a callback.
Okay, and as we're looking at effectiveness, are we able to have different variables in the matrix to see that people are actually getting better, or kind of where are they flowing through the services being provided?
We do. So we do measure outcomes and make sure that see what's happening in those outcomes over a period of time. Absolutely.
Okay, and have you seen a progression, and are there actually markers for goals that you're reaching towards?
That's one where I'd prefer to come back to you, just because I don't want to get out of my skill area, not being a clinician myself. So maybe I could take that as something to get back to you on.
Okay, that would be fine. I just was trying to see if we've been.
The one thing I would say is it's all about decision support and providing those measures so that the right analysis can happen. I do believe is being done quite well.
Okay, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative, and welcome to our subcommittee. And thank you for all that you're doing, and welcome. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Bergman for 5 minutes. Representative Bergman, for some reason, we're not hearing your audio. Okay. There you go. You're on, sir. I just heard you.
Okay, so I pulled out my headset. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Loud and clear. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. You know, it's always, this is a perfect segue, because about the time, you know, as a pilot, especially as a military pilot, about the time you rely on technology, you know, it fails you. So you still have to fly the airplane. Mr. Del Bene, welcome aboard. As we'd say in the Marines, welcome to the fight. You consider yourself a change agent?
Absolutely. I believe in focusing on the fundamentals, figuring out where our processes are today, and absolutely driving improvement across the board in terms of the systems we build, how we operate them, how well they serve veterans, and focusing on end user outcomes. So I would say overall, absolutely.
So any thoughts on how you're going to tackle an organization as large as the VA, especially when you go outside of those who actually draw the paycheck as, you know, federal employees? And we've already talked about the contractors and the interactions with them. Any thoughts on your mind already, or, you know, from a, you know, you're a strategist, strategy for implementing necessary organizational change that you see, again, based upon your experience coming into here?
It's a great question. To me, and this is true in a lot of different places in business and government, I believe as well, focusing on the fundamentals. And those fundamentals are both how we're executing today and getting very rigorous about going deep, for instance, and how we're doing in providing the infrastructure and making it highly reliable, fault tolerant, how we're doing in terms of security. That is absolutely critical. And I think actually just by digging in, and I talked about this engineering fundamentals, turning the crank, getting better and better over a period of time is key. In terms of what we deliver, it is literally about deep engagement with the stakeholders, making sure we have the right vision, making sure that's converted into a prioritized product plan, getting those measures of success right, making sure that we have the right resources allocated. For me, it's about, I honestly think it's not about coming in and say, we're going to shake things up and do things everywhere differently. It's about digging deeply and understanding how we're working today and how we can work even better to serve veterans moving forward.
Okay. Any thoughts on, for the longest time, when service members left the Department of Defense, they really kind of dropped into the abyss, whether it was after, initial active duty contract or at the end of their 8-year obligation or some level of reserve service or after a 20+ year retirement. They really kind of had to crawl their way out with their own records and all of that to get themselves established in the VA. And I know there's some of us who've been working on building those bridges between DoD and VA for literally almost 2 decades. So any thoughts on synergies that you might, as you move forward, and the balancing with DoD efforts, so we don't end up, I think there was a famous bridge somewhere up in Boston or somewhere there that when they put the 2 ends together, they didn't meet. And so the point is, how do we complete the bridge spans in your mind between DoD and VA?
Great question. I think you start by thinking of the journey, if you will, the customer or user journey. And as they come from active duty into retirement or back and forth, we have to recognize that people go back and forth quite frequently from active duty to being a reservist or back. I think we can map that journey and make sure that it's easy on the veteran. We're making investments that make that easier, such as the va.gov portal, where you can see everything that's going on with the VA. We can also kind of make it easier for people once they leave service to understand that, hey, there are things like the portal to help them get connected to their retired life and the services that are available to them. And then the other thing, to your point around, we are working to have a common medical record between your time in the DoD and outside of the DoD. And that's going to be really critical in terms of being able to see your medical situation as it crosses over and crosses back. But I totally embrace the vision.
Well, thank you. Just know that every member of this committee, not only the subcommittees, but of the Veterans Affairs Committee on both sides of the aisle, is committed to doing the right thing for our veterans. And at the same time, we're relying on folks like you in the leadership roles to bring that private sector expertise in not only strategy, but implementation of those, items that you decide are your, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, your priorities. So we have one rule in our office, and that is bad news doesn't get better with time. So the point is, when in your position, if you sense something, see something, hear something, please engage us right away so we can keep a little brush fire from becoming a forest fire, because it's all about services to the veterans and their families. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. And again, welcome to the fight, Mr. Del Bene.
Thank you, Representative Bergman. And I love that advice about bad news not getting better over time. I'm going to utilize that if I could. I appreciate that. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Underwood for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's joint subcommittee hearing is a reminder of the critical importance of the VA's IT infrastructure in determining the effectiveness of programs designed to serve our veterans. If we don't get the IT side right, it could mean that our veterans don't have access to the timely, high-quality healthcare they deserve, or the benefits they've earned, or the support they need as they navigate the VA's oftentimes complex systems. A prominent example of the VA's IT challenges has been the implementation of the Electronic Health Record Modernization Initiative, which has faced unacceptable setbacks and delays. I am glad our committee continues to carry out oversight efforts to ensure that the VA gets this program right. The Health Record Modernization Initiative is one of the many IT challenges the VA is facing. These issues touch every corner of the department and affect the lives of every one of our veterans. Assistant Secretary Del Bene, Chairman Takano asked about hurdles to getting the VA's modernization initiatives back on track And I'm encouraged to hear that you've already identified the main challenges you need to focus on. What do you need from Congress to address those hurdles?
Well, I think first I would say that you being engaged in that discussion and having a back and forth to figure out, understand, and we want to be very transparent about how things are going and have that dialogue. I think that's first and foremost. The second thing is making sure that we have the resourcing necessary to execute the program. You know, any of these large software development projects, they move in a direction we change over time and we adjust. And so certainly keeping in lockstep of understanding where we are today, and what hurdles we face, and us being very transparent with you about those hurdles, and then brainstorming how can we help both, you know, on the legislative side of things, and us telling you what we're doing on our side. And so there can be some joint decision or kind of problem solving, if you will. But that,
Okay.
and then I'm sure there will also be the opportunity to like how the regulations and impact the health portal over time, and having your partnership there as well will be critical.
Okay. Another issue of great concern to me is the VA's ongoing failure to comprehensively track demographic data for our veterans. These issues were identified by President Biden in an executive order that he issued on his very first day in office, which noted how the lack of demographically disaggregated federal data has cascading effects and impedes efforts to measure and advance equity. At the root of this problem for the VA is the department's lack of a single centralized database containing demographic data for beneficiaries. Can you share an update on VA's implementation of this executive order? And is VA looking into opportunities to develop a centralized database that could finally provide it with the comprehensive demographic data on veterans served by the department?
Yes, it's absolutely critical to have that demographic data. And we are building what's called the VA profile, which has that data, that critical data that identifies and gives demographic information about vets. The other thing I would say that's important about that is to have that in a data architecture, so that piece of data can be mashed up against other data to help us provide more insights about how to serve people better. But we are very focused on providing that capability. In fact, I just had a briefing on that last week.
Do you have a timeline for rollout?
I can get back to you on the specifics of that timeframe, but I thought actually a lot of the capabilities, at least internally, is available. It's a matter of how we plug that into the various systems, and a lot of that is ongoing.
Well, we would love if that could happen this calendar year. I think that would be an excellent improvement in this modernization effort, and I do look forward to your response in written form. I was encouraged by the announcement last month that the VA will now include gender identity in the department's medical record system, an important step in creating a welcoming and inclusive environment in VA facilities that every one of our veterans deserves. How can the Office of Information Technology help share this announcement across the VA system so that veterans receive the care they need and are treated with the respect they deserve in every interaction that they have with the department?
Well, it's a good question. I would probably want to get back to you to talk to our communications folks on how we want to share that information is now built into our systems. But I wholeheartedly support the idea of, let's let veterans know on how we support them in having this identity within their records.
Well, Mr. Assistant Secretary, I think that's right. There's two parts of that, though. There's the operational component where the clinician needs to ask the question and then log it in the system, which is an important step, as well as the communications around the values around inclusiveness. And so I would not just solely defer to the communicators because we need that to be operationally deployed and have universal uptake to ensure that those most impacted can feel that the VA is an inclusive, welcoming environment. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Underwood. At this time, the chair recognizes Chairman Pappas for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary. It's really good to have you here. And I want to first start by talking about supply chain modernization, which the committee has spent a lot of time examining. As I mentioned in my opening statement, VA system for buying and tracking supplies is antiquated, and it is ineffective as well. Waste not only money, but even putting veterans at risk when medical and surgical supplies aren't there. So I realize you've been on the job for a short time, but I want to know a little bit more about what you've learned so far about VA's planned solution for modernizing the supply chain, which goes by the name DIMLS.
Well, thank you for the question. I agree with the notion that we have an opportunity there to be state of the art in terms of how we manage our supply chain. I think everybody in the organization believes that. Demos, as you know, is a solution that's provided by the DoD and is used in the DoD. There are obvious opportunities to, if logistically it's possible, to share the solutions across DoD and VA. We are exercising that system, understanding its capabilities. As you know, in manned grand staff, we've had some engagement with there as well as in a clinic in Chicago. But I think rightly so, our chief acquisition officer has said we should also step back and look at what the different options are that are available to us to make sure that we're making a conscious decision based on the requirements of the program, and end up with the best solution for our supply chain solution at the VA. And so that's what I'd say. One, we're looking deeply at how Demos works. We're also looking at other commercial solutions that might be available. And we want to make sure that we make the right choice there because it is such a critical decision, as you mentioned.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about how you see your role in determining that long-term solution? Does your office have the authority to say no if you determine the IT aspects of a supply chain modernization contract just won't work?
And I think there's a number of elements. I think there's a technical aspect of whatever solution we deploy, and our team will be engaged there. There's second, I've worked on a lot of very large development implementations in my history, and I think I have a perspective that I can lend in conversations to say, have we thought about this or have we thought about that? And so I'll engage with the teams on that one as well. I have a good relationship with the chief acquisition officer in that regard, and our team will be engaged in that analysis. And then finally, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, I have the opportunity to review it and decide whether those allocations make sense.
Well, thanks for that. And I think we want to make sure we have a clear understanding of the lines of authority for approving major acquisition decisions. You elaborated on that a little bit, but I don't know if there's anything more you could add about the authority of the CIO, the CAO, the CFO, and where that all comes into play to pause or stop programs involving IT that just aren't meeting objectives.
It's important to say it's a balance. I mean, the chief acquisition officer has the responsibility to drive the analysis for key acquisitions. And I think having that great partnership is really important. At the end of the day, there are responsibilities of the CIO to sign off on the finances of a particular program. And I have an opportunity to look at those and say, do I believe that this is money that's being spent in the appropriate way? But you have to use it in a collaborative fashion with the other stakeholders. It wouldn't be as effective if all of a sudden you just raise a red flag and say no. Better if all the right analysis happens at all the right times.
Just want to change gears a little bit. I mentioned in my opening statement about a hearing that I co-chaired in July of 2020. The GAO detailed at that hearing why incidents of sexual harassment are widespread throughout the department's hospitals and other facilities. And VA leadership clearly needs to continue to take action. Some important steps were described. We're at the beginning of making sure we're seeing good progress there. One critical solution GAO identified was that VA is still in need of an effective system to ensure that all incidents of sexual harassment are reported and properly handled. It's by no means a large IT project by VA standards, but GAO has noted that the new IT system is not yet operational, even though VA promised its completion last year. So I'm just wondering, what is it that delays projects like this one, and how can various parts of VA, from the hospitals to benefits processing to the cemeteries, all work together to meet deadlines and implementing systems as straightforward as a case tracking system in this case?
It's a very good question. Thank you for it. It turns out, and I have reviewed what the current state is of our reporting systems. All the different parts of the VA have reporting systems. They just have different ones. And so there's complexity there, which you can debate whether that complexity is too much. But what we need to do is to bring those together into a single way that we can have a left to right view, if you will. And so that's where we're focused on. We have a task force working on that, and they do perceive the urgency of pulling that together. But I just wanted to reassure you, there are systems within the different parts of the VA where people can report these cases of sexual harassment, and they can be triaged and worked on.
Thanks for your comments. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. At this time, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Del Bene, after our hearing last session on the IT budget at VA, our subcommittee requested deep dives on each of the program areas to get a better understanding of what projects OIT has in its portfolio and where there may be funding gaps. I apologize. I'm happy to report to you that the staff at OIT and the acting CIO, Dr. Evans, provided an incredible amount of information and transparency. It was a lot of work and time invested, and I'm greatly appreciative of their efforts. One area of the IT budget that we found concerning was a decision last year to significantly decrease the funding for VA Profile. VA Profile was established as the authoritative data source for veteran contact information and empowers veterans to update their information through all integrated customer service points of entry. Accurate and complete data is extremely important to ensure we are investing in resources that our veterans need and that all veterans are accounted for. I'm encouraged that Secretary McDonough has made a major contribution by expanding information that veterans can contribute to include either gender identity. I think that we can do even more. My question is, would you agree that accurate collection and communication of data across VA is fundamental to the success and usability of these large IT programs?
Absolutely. And to your point around VA Profile, I think the most important thing is to focus on one. We believe it's a critical capability to provide this capability both for internal analysis and for the veterans to express their particular demographics as well. And that work is still progressing apace. And so that's the thing that as I said, I just had a review of that last week. And the feeling is that we're integrating in with the key systems and the right deliverables are happening.
Would you be supportive of more efforts to standardize veterans information across VA and providing them a system comparable to what is provided by the DoD?
I would generally say that the standardization of information, as long as it allows the proper expression of individualism, for a particular scenario, is a good thing to have, because then you can do analysis across the broad category of veterans and make sure that they, for instance, have the services that they need. And by doing the right categorization, you can help do that, and standardization. I'm not familiar what the DoD does in particular in this area, and I think I'll take that away as something to look into. But as a general rule, standardization, as long as it doesn't preclude the opportunities for individuals, does unlock new capabilities to deliver more services to a broader set of people.
The Office of Inspector General released its June 2021 an IT audit on the outpatient center in Austin, Texas. They found that VA can't see more than half of the hardware components that are connected to their network. I'm sure that you're aware that the first step in NIST's cybersecurity framework is identification of assets. Basically, we can't secure what we can't see. The IG specifically noted that the VA was unable to identify the same components as the IG using the same auditing software. Unfortunately, the IG does not have the personnel or the budget to conduct these independent audits for all the VA medical centers. It's extremely important that we are vigilant with cybersecurity at VA, and securing the information of our veterans and resolving this issue is a priority for our subcommittee. How would you recommend VA addresses this issue?
It's a great question, and I have looked at the June report. One of the things, the foremost thing we have to do is be in very good lockstep with the methodology that's used in the OIG versus how we do things internally. We have been building a very sophisticated solution to make sure that we see every single device that's on our network. And I think a little bit of was a disagreement about kind of the methodology used, that we've spent a bunch of time with the OIG kind of figuring this out. And the process is always kind of a back and forth to get to the ground truth in the end. I fully support the NIST standard, because it's really, you got to have an inventory to understand the readiness of each of those endpoints. I will also say that even in industry, this is an incredibly complex issue of devices come onto the network and fall back off the network, in test environments, et cetera. But that just makes it even more important to really spend a ton of time making sure you have a great inventory. So the general tenor of what the OIG said, I fully agree with, and it's an area of major investment for us.
If I may follow up with a question, just on a grand philosophical view of your perspective when it comes to cybersecurity and the zero trust initiative, and where that will be played into the cybersecurity of the VA.
I believe very firmly in the zero trust approach. Essentially, know the devices that are logging in, know the identity of the person, know that the device is strong, is secure. Make sure that you assume the boundary is the perimeter is porous and that people will get through. You make sure once they get through, they have limited access or least privilege access. These tenets together form the core of a secure infrastructure. There are some things that aren't addressed, and I think everybody aren't addressed in the zero trust architecture, but we will add those on. And to my opening statements, that's why it's important for us not to just say we'll implement zero trust, but to fundamentally have a comprehensive strategy. Zero trust is a piece of that, having great telemetry and AI-based solutions to identify malfeasance and bad activities early. It all kind of combines together, and it's one of those things that you have to constantly be iterating because the bad actors are always iterating, but it really anchors down to clear strategy, clear set of action plans, clear measurement of how far we are towards the goal.
And I thank you very much. I was able to have a quick conversation, not to go over, with a cybersecurity entity within my district who talked about the integrity and making sure that you minimize the bad actors, and even in some instances only allow the good actors in. And so I appreciate that perspective. At this time, I would like to recognize Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Del Bene, our staff's recently completed a series of budget deep dive sessions that Chairman Mervan had just referenced and that we had requested last year. The conclusion is the structure of your budget does not communicate what your office is doing or the trade-offs or prioritization that you're making. Have you had ample time to see this yet?
Well, thank you for the question. As I said in my opening remarks, I do think this is a place where we can grow in our ability to look at the different programs we have and understand very richly what are the resources being allocated to each of those programs. I've talked to the team about understanding the cut line, what's above the line and what's below the line, and make sure that we feel good about those decisions. So I think net, I would say we still have an opportunity here. It's a place of prioritization for me. It's always been a place of prioritization for me, even in my time in the private sector as well. I think people would say that I had a placemat that would tell me every single program that we had in my organization, what the resources were allocated. And you can look at it and say, does it intuitively make sense? Does it make sense in the details as well? So wholeheartedly agree with you on the importance of that.
And that's what we need so that we can actually perform our duties in oversight. We can't do that if we can't see what those priorities are and how many resources are being dedicated to it. So I like to say that there's a difference between allowing folks to speak and then listening to what they have to say. There's a lot of very polite people that allow you to speak, but they don't really listen to what you say. So will you commit to considering and responding to the conclusions once we deliver those to you?
I will. I think it's I like your analogy. It is a back and forth conversation. And I think we learn that in a lot of places. The best collaboration is one where the perspectives of one side are expressed. We kind of give you feedback on those and iterate. And I very much look forward to having that kind of a conversation with you.
Very good. I understand you recently lost or about to lose roughly 300 employees who were hired using the CARES Act funds. This is related to the continuing resolution, but it seems to have happened before any action on the current resolution. Did this in fact happen, and what will be the impact of this? What would you be able to do about it?
It did happen, and we essentially looked at where the budget was trending and took actions where we needed to because of the continuing resolution. And so I would just ask for the help that all those in this hearing can provide in getting us to a stable funding source. The CR sets that funding at last year's level. In 4 weeks, I'm not an expert in this, but that challenge, because 22's budget was higher, puts us in a very difficult situation. And it will only get more difficult over a period of time unless we get this resolved.
And I'm glad you're talking about predictable funds and budgeting. That leads me to my next question. Are you familiar with the transformation fund? Okay, so I was skeptical about the transformation fund personally. Yeah, I served on finance and claims in the legislature, and I've seen these accounts build up and then get drained again. The ability to bank that unspent money, most of it from medical services, could create an incentive to siphon that money off of medical services. But OIT is already relying on it this year, and next year the budget would fall apart without it. What are you going to do if the transformation fund ends?
Well, first, I think it's important for you characterize the situation well in terms of it's become something we're depending upon in fiscal year 22. I think we still have a discussion in fiscal year 23. The ideal thing is actually not to depend upon the transformation funds, but to put that in the base budget. I mean, we've had discussions about what the level of spend in IT is in the VA versus the rest of the agencies, and it is much lower. And we need to kind of raise that base budget to a point that's commensurate with the complexity of the organization and the sheer size of the organization as well.
And again, this is where that information from the deep dive that we did, when we can see where the funds are going, what the priorities are, and identify if in fact we can shift some of those funds around as well.
I mean, you all have a responsibility in terms of our financial funding, and I want to make sure we have a cooperative relationship there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see I'm right on the button. I would yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Rosendale. And I just want to reiterate before I recognize Mr. Pappas how important it is for us to make sure that we get the CR taken care of and have funding operations that are consistent for our agencies to be able to budget properly and move forward in the way that allows you to be disciplined and successful in what you're doing and taking care of the veterans. At this time, I'd like to recognize Congressman Pappas.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple additional questions here, more big picture. The first one I wanted to ask about, I know that VA is one of only 2 agencies whose overall FITARA score, that's the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, that the scorecard grade went down in 2021. And it was largely due to poor grades in a few areas: portfolio review savings, modernizing government technology, and cybersecurity. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I don't know if you've discussed it already, but could you talk a little bit more about this particular scorecard? I know you've related to us a number of plans for to address deficiencies and move the agency forward, but wondering specific to this scorecard, what should we be looking for?
Well, the first thing I'd say is the measures that they involve in the scorecard to me are the most important things. And so this notion that we would do portfolio reviews and look for cost savings, absolutely critical, constant, continuous operation that I think is important, the team thinks is important as well. Similarly, we've talked a bunch about cybersecurity, that critical there as well. All of these areas that they talk about are really important for us in terms of areas to focus on. The particular debate about, or the measure that people use in any one of those areas that drives towards the score, I'm actually more interested in making sure we get better as an organization and that we take those dimensions and that we're driving an agenda that we understand in each of those agenda. I would love for our scorecard to not go down, but I'm much more focused on making sure that we get to excellence in each of those dimensions.
Okay, I appreciate that. How long does it take to turn the ship? We've talked a lot about, big, long-standing projects. We've talked about just the limitations that you have in terms of resources, in terms of staff. As we think about, benchmarks and how we measure improvement, When do we start to see results?
It's a great question. I think if we have a dialogue, we can talk about the successes that we've had over a period of time. In answer to your core question, though, I actually look at this as an incremental exercise that we can make good progress early on, but it's more about steering the ship in the right direction. I don't think we're heading in a diametrically opposed direction. We've got to change the direction of the ship. I think we need to focus it in, it's a matter of moving it a bit in this direction and then really kind of amplifying that. So I'll just give you a quick example. This ability to get into a deeper, rigorous analysis every time we have a system failure is something we can start exercising today. We don't have to wait to do that. And it isn't going to take us 6 months or a year, but the actual learnings and getting those synapses driven, kind of built together so that it's natural, that's going to take a little bit more time to do. But I think we can realize things immediately and then build on those successes.
Okay. One final one. VA has an operations board. It's headed by the deputy secretary, includes the CIO as a member. Has it reviewed DIMLS, FMBT, and EHRM and improved these programs? And in addition to that, what about the VA executive board, which is led by the secretary? And if there have been reviews, what did they find?
I would kind of go back to the commitment of our chief acquisition officer to make sure that we have a rigorous process for key acquisitions. I think that's at its core. I think in terms of IT programs, the board that exists there, they've reviewed all the different programs and do that in a rotational basis. And so I actually don't know whether DIMLS in particular came up. Since it's in its early stages, I would guess it probably didn't come up into that review board. But I will also say that a lot of discussion has happened within the VA on this question of what our supply chain strategy should be and what role that DIMLS plays in that. There has been no lack of discussion around that topic.
Okay. And can you talk about dependencies between these major IT efforts and what's being done to coordinate across VA, and what specifically is OIT's role in that coordination?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, for instance, the financial management transformation, those systems have to come to one of the agencies at a time when they're ready to receive them. And so each one of the major programs looks at the environment that they have and makes sure that this is the right staging. Financial management, the transformation there is a good example because we have some opportunity to move around schedules and deploy in a way that's consistent with other change that's going on right there. And then there's just the core infrastructure in every place that we need to deploy, for instance, the new health record system. There's a lot of infrastructure requirements there, such as making sure you have the right PCs, making sure you have the right network. And we actually do concrete kind of coordination between the core program and all the supporting issues to make sure that they come there together.
Thanks very much. I've gone over my time, so I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. At this time, that would conclude all the questions that we have. I just want to make sure, Ranking Member Rosendale, do you have a closing statement? Okay. I would Chairman Pappas, do you have a closing statement? If you do, you have 5 minutes.
Well, I'll just be real quick. I just want to thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary, for joining us here today. I know that both of our subcommittees see you in your office as a real critical player in moving VA in the right direction. We need to see a more modern and effective agency, and that comes with better strategies and greater innovation and greater use of resources. So we just appreciate your comments here today. I know that the breadth of veteran services and operations in the department are stymied to an extent by out-of-date software and overtaxed hardware. And so you have an important role to play in pulling all that together. And we look forward to working closely with you to support you and certainly wish you all the success in the world. So I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of you. I thank you for your efforts and really happy to see you at VA. I yield back.
Chairman Pappas, I thank you very much. At this time, in conclusion, I just want to thank you, Mr. Delbene, for your time, for your effort, bringing your expertise, and making sure that the message of Congress and the VA being focused on the needs of the veteran and also the staff, and giving them the tools necessary. Through this whole process today, one thing that I recognized amongst many other things was you called the veteran the customer. And that is a welcomed approach towards what we are doing, because the most important aspect of what we're doing with IT is making sure that the outcomes, that the veterans are served when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to benefits, and when it comes to world-class healthcare. With that being said, I would like to thank you, our witness, for your participation today. I hope this hearing underscores how important I believe that the department's technology modernization efforts are, and the department's continued progress in program management and acquisition, as well as a deeper commitment of cybersecurity. I look forward to continuing this conversation and hope that we begin to see some real progress in VA's efforts to address these longstanding issues. With that, we are adjourned. I thank you all very much.